Recently, I acquired the LoD Offroad Destroyer front bumper for my 2018 Jeep JK Unlimited. And for those of you who have not seen my prior review and video, I had published an article and a video on the LoD Offroad Destroyer rear bumper. I did acquire that a year and a half ago. Overall, I was happy with the LoD Offroad Destroyer rear bumper with tire carrier. I did find some faults with it at the time, but I've learned to deal with those faults, and funny enough, they did address one of those faults. I don't know if they saw my video or my article, but a lot of people respond to my video and article, some with positive criticism, some with negative criticism or non-constructive criticism, but it is what it is, being the internet. But they pointed out that they made some changes to that bumper, and I went to take a look, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. I'm glad they did that, because I would have been much happier had I gotten the next generation, but it is what it is. That's how products, sort of develop. There's always going to be new revisions of things. But as far as my front bumper, I was running the stock factory JK bumper for quite some time, ever since I bought it. So I ran it with a winch plate, so I got the rock hard 4x4 winch plate, and I was able to run a winch on that. That was probably my first upgrade to the Jeep. I didn't want to do too much to the Jeep when I first got it, but I definitely wanted a winch if I was going to go do some off-road stuff. I wanted to be able to have a way to get out if I'm by myself. I'm granted you're not supposed to go off-roading by yourself, but things being what they are, you may find yourself out on a trail or something, and you may need to assist yourself. So I went ahead and did that, but I think I said, you know what? After a while, you're like wanting to get a new front bumper. You obviously want this different styling of a front bumper, and that factory front bumper becomes a pain to deal with because that plastic. It's not really fading so much. What I find that it collects dirt and the dirt sticks on it. It's hard to get it out because you think it's like sort of getting gray. The fact is that the dirt that, if you go off-roading and it gets mixed with water and mud, that stuff doesn't come out, and you sit there with a brush and try to get it out, but it's just sort of in there, and you have to use like 303. I'm not sure if you use 303 protectant to sort of get that out, and it can sort of get the dirt to come out of the plastic, but it gets a pain to deal with. And then other things, I just wanted to run a shorter bumper. So I said, you know what, may as well look into start getting a front bumper, and things being what they are right now with the COVID-19 protocols. I mean, it's May as I'm recording this, and we're sort of coming out of it. But, a couple months ago, had some time to do more projects at the house. So I said, you know what, let me look at a front bumper. Quadratec had a sale on LoD products. So I said, you know what, let's go ahead and do that. So I went ahead and ordered the LoD Offroad Destroyer front bumper in the short configuration or the stubby configuration with a bull bar. I ordered the LoD Offroad Destroyer bumper front skid plate, the LoD Offroad license plate mount, the LoD Offroad fair lead mount, and then the LoD Offroad fair lead accessory mount. So you can run an accessory on the fair lead, such as lights. Overall, after it's all said and done, I'm fairly happy with the bumper. I like the style. I like the fact that it has the openings for the OEM fog lights, because I have LED OEM fog lights that came with the vehicle. So it was nice to be able to use those. I like the bull bar with the accessory tab, because they have an accessory tab welded to the bull bar, so you can add more lights here. You can have the lights mounted here, or if you want to run some sort of fair lead accessory mount, you can run it on top of the fair lead. And if you were so inclined, you can just drill here and install lights onto your bumper. It has the what am I thinking here? The D-ring shackle mounts here. And then, yeah, that's kind of it as far as the features and the powder coating. The price of this, I can't recall, is around $650 if you go straight to LoD, but Quadratec has a sale. And they have better pricing overall anyway on LoD products. And then you can go with Northridge as well. Northridge 4x4, I bought from them. LoD Offroad products from Northridge. So you can find a good price on this. As far as cost savings on a bumper, like I said before, the OEM factory bumper with the winch plate is cheaper than buying a new bumper. But you can probably get a winch capable bumper for about $300, and it goes up from there depending on the quality and and the manufacturer. So I said that I'm overall happy with it as far as the design and everything, but I did find faults with the bumper when I installed it, and while they're not deal breakers, they are something to think about, because when you look at the manual, because you can get the manual online or the instructions on how to install, the bumper looks straightforward, and then the front skid plate looks straightforward to install, but they're not. And then I'll go ahead and dive into those. There's just a few faults, but they'll require some explaining, so let's go ahead and get into those. I made the initial statement that the install of this front LoD Offroad Destroyer bumper is not straightforward. And so the first thing I wanted to point out is the fog lights. So it's a minor detail, but the fog lights did require a little bit of drilling because well, not on the bumper itself, but on the fog light brackets. The OEM fog lights have this kind of plastic bracket around the light, which is where you mount because it has 4 holes. They didn't line up 100% perfect on the holes with the front bumper, so I had to drill out or kind of hone out a couple of the holes on each bracket just so that you can get the brackets to fit without it flexing and like kind of bending the plastic. I felt it was going to be a better idea just to drill those holes out so that you have less tension there and there's no kind of warpage there, and you might not kind of either tear or kind of break that plastic, those tabs off when you screw them down. So I just wanted to make sure that there was no tension there. Not a big deal, and that was easy. But the second item that I wanted to bring up is the vacuum pump. And let me come around the left driver's side here. It's gonna be a little difficult to see here, but there's this vacuum pump. Now on a Jeep Wrangler JK, this vacuum pump right here on the front of the vehicle can be a problem with recessed winch bumpers because you have to relocate that if you were gonna have the winch recessed into the bumper, because that'll block the way. Generally with a top mounted winch, that's not a problem. Well, when I put this bumper on, apparently the rear of the bumper had this sort of lip that was making contact with that vacuum pump, and basically it was hitting it, and you would sort of have to flex that vacuum pump bracket down. And I was shocked that was a problem, so I ended up cutting off or just grinding off some clearance on that rear of the bumper, that tab there, or that lip, to make sure that there was plenty of clearance between the bumper and the vacuum pump. It only took a few minutes, and then I just repainted it so there's no bare metal there. But that is an issue there for those of you who are looking at this bumper. You're probably gonna have to grind that off, assuming you have a JK. I'm not sure if they were addressing this for earlier models of JKs, but maybe the 2018, maybe it has a different bracket design or whatnot, but I'm not sure why that became an issue here, because it shouldn't have been a problem, because they didn't make any indication in the instructions that this vacuum pump would be in the way. And I don't know, something to bring up, so I wanted to point that out as far as something that I had to do immediately when I was putting on this bumper. A fault that I found in the LoD Offroad Destroyer front bumper while I was installing it is the accessory tab that's welded to the bull bar. I found that it's off-centered. I tried to square up the camera and center it on the front of the Jeep as best as possible, so you may not be able to tell on video, but this tab is about 3/4, maybe half an inch to 3/4 of an inch off-centered to the left, to the passenger side of the vehicle. And so you'll see it, you can tell better in still photos when I have a light installed on the top. Once you have a light up here centered up, you're like, wow, you can tell that the accessory tab is welded off-centered. It's kind of annoying. It's not a big deal because you're not going to notice until you're up close and you kind of stare at it, like, wow, why is there more tab on this left side? But generally you're not going to notice. But I just wanted to point out it's kind of annoying that when they welded this tab on here, they didn't center it up. The accessory mounts for the LoD Offroad front Destroyer bumper are a great concept, but the execution is not perfect. So one of the problems I found when after I put on the brackets for the license plate mount and the fair lead mount and the fair lead accessory mount is the fact that the fair lead accessory mount isn't far forward enough from the winch, or the winch is too far forward on the bumper. Because when I put this light bar here originally on top of the LoD Offroad fair lead accessory mount, the rear of the light bar was hitting the winch, so you couldn't even get it in there because there was no room, there's no clearance. So that's why I put this light bar on top of the bull bar originally. I was able to get it back into this position by making my own plate. So I got a 3-inch aluminum plate. You cut the length and I just painted it. But the reason why I did that is because that plate, I mounted the plate to the fair lead accessory mount, and then I mounted the light to the plate. So it allowed me to drill my own holes so I can offset it more forward. So that's how I got it here. The license plate mount is actually too close as well, so you barely have enough clearance to put the license plate, the bolts. I think they need to offset the brackets a little bit more, such that the bracket holes that are drilled, maybe I should have just drilled out the bracket holes myself. I think you should add an extra ½ inch on, at least on the license plate mount, ½ inch or another inch. I would say ½ an inch. Move it forward. As far as the fair lead mount, definitely I think there's very little clearance between this fair lead mount and the winch. Very little. You can barely put a finger in between there, and I can't even put my my step 22 gear winch cover on there. I have to kind of just fold the flaps in because I can't wedge it in there. So it's very little clearance. So I'm thinking they should also offset the winch, the mounting holes, maybe a ½ inch back, because if you look, there's plenty of clearance between the winch and the front of the grill. So I'm gonna go ahead and show this off real quick. There's plenty of clearance here. Back when I had the rock hard 4x4 winch plate, there was less clearance in this, and it was more coming back towards the grill. I couldn't even get my hands down here to like kind of clean off the grill. So definitely there's some clearance here. If I took this winch cover off, you probably see better, but you can see here how there's very little clearance between the winch and the fair lead mount. So I think moving the winch holes back about ½ an inch should give more clearance to the front, and then offset the brackets about ½ an inch should help that out a little bit. That's kind of my complaint there as far as the accessory mounts. The other item I wanted to bring up with regards to a straightforward install or lack thereof is the front bumper skid plate. It's a separate accessory. It's an optional accessory. It mounts with 4 bolts on the front, 2 bolts on the rear. The 4 bolts on the front are basically they're threaded bolts because the bumper itself is threaded for it, so you just run the bolts through and that's it. Now the 2 rear bolts are kind of they tell you to drill into the frame for the passenger side one. They said the driver's side hole on the rear should be an opening for that where you can put it in there. Yes and no. So the existing hole on the driver's side, it's actually where there's a post here on the frame. The hole is just below the post. You can't get your hand in there because the post blocks it. It's like this, it's a square post, it's a square post. There's no way you can get a finger in there to get the bolt to run the nut, to hold the nut there and then run the bolt. So that's one problem. And then the second one is, I think on the driver or the passenger side, if you were to drill where the bolt is supposed to be the hole on the front skid plate, there's a cutout there. It's probably like a drainage cutout or whatever for any moisture or water. The bolt is like partially on that. So if I were to drill in that spot, you're basically kind of drilling on the edge of that cutout. So you have really no point for the nut to hold anything. So I had to end up doing is drilling out the front skid plate to move the holes for the bolts, I think inward more, so I have clearance. And there's an existing hole in the frame for where I drilled on both sides, and they're relatively easy to access. So I drilled the front skid plate and painted it, but that's not the other point. Where those holes on the rear and where it meets the frame, they don't meet. So the skid plate and the frame, there's actually about a 3/4 inch gap between the rear of the skid plate and the frame on where you're supposed to bolt them. So if you were to bolt them, like run a bolt in a nut, you'll have it there, it'll be kind of hanging, but you're using the pressure or the tension or the torque of the nut and the bolt to kind of squeeze them together, and there's just nothing there. So you're basically kind of like flexing it until you get about the right amount of torque in there. So rather than do that, I ended up just putting spacers in between there, on the bolts. So I just bought a square of iron or steel rather, and I cut they're 1 by 1 inch bar of steel. Cut those in 3/4 inch, and then drilled a hole through and painted it. And I used those as spacers, so I wedged them in between the skid plate and the frame, and ran the bolt through that, and that's how I secured it. Frankly, I think they should do that too. I think LoD should make spacers for that. I don't like the idea of just having the nut and the bolt just kind of squeezing them together, and there's like nothing, there's like that gap there. So yeah, that's kind of the other thing I had to do, and it took me a couple days to like, because I painted everything to make sure like the spacers were bare steel, so I painted those, and I painted the holes I cut on the new holes I cut on the skid plate. That basically sums up my overview of the LoD Offroad Destroyer front bumper with bull bar and front skid plate. There's a few faults that I found. They're not 100% deal breakers, but they're definitely things you should know about, at least from my experience when installing this bumper. You're not going to see that in the instruction manual, or the installation manuals from them. So I wanted to make sure that I bring those up so you're well aware of what you're getting into when you install this. I'm going to have an article that I'm going to post to kind of capture what I discussed here a little bit more in detail with more photos that you can refer to. But overall, I'm happy with the bumper. What I found with Jeeps, when aftermarket products, things are not always what they seem when you install them. As much as they try to make these things perfectly fit to install, there's always going to be some quality control issues, either from the aftermarket manufacturer or the Jeep. I mean, maybe Jeep decided to make a slight modification on something, like that vacuum pump bracket may have been different on the 2018s. Who knows? But just wanted to bring those up, and hopefully this gives you at least some more information so you can make a better decision on whether or not you want to go with the LoD Offroad Destroyer front bumper or try another competitor's product. But yes, as I said earlier, overall I'm happy with the bumper. I like the design, the styling, the features, the accessory mounts and all that. And hopefully in the near future, I'm going to add a couple lights to the top. I wanted to get some amber lights for the top. I'm going to mount them on the accessory bracket on the bull bar. And I might actually drill holes for a couple lights on the bumper. I don't know. I have hard shackles. I keep them in the Jeep. I don't mount hard shackles permanently. Like, I know people drive around with the D-rings on their bumpers, but I leave them off. I keep them inside my recovery bag. I'd rather not keep them on the Jeep. So anyway, that's it for this video. Hopefully this helps you out. And if you have any questions, feel free to post them and I'll try to answer them for you. Thanks for watching.